we can start. Today we're using the same format as we had last time. So we're trying to do these kind of short sessions where we look at specific items that are considered under the Be Resilient program and also see how we can pilot them in some of the biosphere reserves that are interested to join that particular element. So today I invited our Flemish Institute for Technological Research in Flemish. It's called VITO. And we have Laurent Titz here from VITO's side, who is the expert on remote sensing. And they have been using a lot of work on the vegetation sensors, and he will give a bit more detail on that over several years or decades, even also managing their own satellite for a period of time. So they were actually interested to maybe support also some of the work in the biosphere reserves related to vegetation monitoring and specifically also crop-related aspects of that through some of the applications they've been developing, and they will go into a bit more detail. So before, without much detail, I think we don't need to really go into a big round of introductions. I think most of you know who is here. Most of you are, of course, related to biosphere reserves, and some of you are related to, let's say, Man and Biosphere program or related activities of the Be Resilient project. So I'm just going to give the floor quickly to Laurent for an introductory presentation. After that, we're going to have some time for questions and answers, and maybe we can also discuss a bit about how we can engage with you on rolling out some of those pilot applications. But we don't really have an application form for the moment where we could just discuss and maybe find a way to express your interest going beyond this meeting. So just I would like to invite then, all right, this is from the previous one. I would just like to invite then Laurent to give us a bit of an overview of his work as part of VITO. So floor is yours, Laurent.
Okay, thank you for the introductions. Well, good morning. So my name is Laurent. I'm from VITO. Koen asked me to present a bit about our platform that we have to monitor basically agricultural fields. Maybe some very quick introduction to VITO. So we are a research institute, and in the remote sensing department we work with everything related to sensors, so satellites, airplanes, drones, and on a wide range of applications. So today I'm going to show you a bit on what we do in agriculture, but actually our application domain goes wider as well. We also do, for example, water quality monitoring, we do natural capital accounting, land cover mapping, so it's a bit broader, but I think specifically for today it's mainly on the agricultural side. I have some, because I'm not sure about the background from everybody, so I just some quick introduction to the satellites themselves. So what we do here is we monitor agricultural production fields or large areas with satellites. So that's why maybe good to start with the technology itself. If you look at satellites, it's really changing very quickly the last, let's say, 5 years, and it's still changing quite a lot every year. Before, it was mainly a technology that was used by like governments, like the Americans and the Russians, of course, and they were sending satellites, and that's where it all started. So you had a few very large satellites that were able to do a lot of things. So they would send one in space because it was very expensive, but that one satellite could do a lot of different things. While now you see that more commercial companies, they're sending many satellites. Like the satellite nowadays is about the size of a shoebox. That's how big it is, and they send like hundreds at the same time into space. So it's a big shift. That means also that if you look at what the satellites can do, it's changing a lot as well. We can, year by year, we get more and more detail. You would be amazed if you see some of those pictures. You would think a few years ago it was only possible if you take them from planes, but now you can see them from space as well. And also the frequency, because they are so small, they send hundreds at the same time. So there's at least one satellite flying over every day, depending on which constellation you look at. So it means we get more and more pictures of the same area, which is very good because it has been a very big problem. So that's what we need. So that means that the availability to the data is increasing as well. Also, it used to be very expensive. If you wanted to buy satellite data, it would cost a lot of money. So it was mainly something for governments and for research purposes. But from an operational point of view, it was just too expensive. But if you now look at, for example, all the European data, it's free. They make it available for free. And some of the commercial data as well is becoming very cheap as well. And because of that, you see that there's a big shift of the use of satellite data. It's not just for the public sector anymore, so it's not only governments working with it, but it's really a large take-up by the private sector as well. And also because of this, that the number of applications, it's really booming. There's new startups, there's new applications coming out at a very quick rate. So it's a very exciting time for this technology. And that's also what comes for us. The same revolution was needed to really bring what we have been doing within a research context, because we've been doing this for about 25 years now. But it was really research context and really bringing it to the field level and seeing what happens in one specific field. It's only been possible the last 4 or 5 years. And the big change was the Sentinel-2 satellite. So it's a satellite from the European Commission. And they made the data freely available. And the nice details was, okay, this satellite flies over every 3 to 5 days. It depends a bit on where you are on the globe. And it gives you images with 10-meter detail. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's really, it was a big change for us. Also important to know, satellites, they don't measure just what you can see with your eyes. So you know that there's all types of light, and you have infrared, and there's a lot of different lights that we cannot see. So those satellites measure more than just the colors of the plants. They measure much more, and it's this additional information that we try to exploit to get real information on what's happening at the field level. So what do we typically measure with satellites? I think to understand conceptually, I think the most important thing that we measure is the greenness, like how green is a field. It's a bit more complicated, but just to try to understand what it is that we do, just try to picture we measure the greenness. Also about the coverage of the field, so how mature are the plants, how much of the field is actually covered, and then the moisture content of the plants. I think those are the most important components of what we measure, and based on these we can already do a lot. There's also 2 ways to use satellites. One is on the bottom of my slide, one moment in time. That means the satellite flies over and he takes a picture of your field. So you have an overview of what's happening on your field. So that's just one measurement in time. And then you can see how the variation is in your field. For example, here on the right-hand side, we measure how much of my field is actually covered. And the coverage is then between 0 and 100%. So that's just one type. So that shows you how is the current state of my field a bit. But the most interesting is actually the one on the right. And that is those satellites fly over every 3 to 5 days. So that means you get a new image every 3 to 5 days. So you can see how it's actually changing. And it's really that change on your field that's the most interesting and where you can get the most information. And for example, typically what we say, like I said before, the greenness index, how green is my field? Here we have an example for potatoes. So you start with your bare field. So your greenness is almost 0. And then the plants start growing. So you see that the greenness of your field goes up until you have your maximum development of your plant. And then your plant starts to die because you have your senescence. And then you can see that it's going down. So it's really that information and how is my crop developing? How is my crop changing in time, where we get most of the information from. So that's a bit the basic context, the theory behind it. And based on this, we built basically a service for many different users to make use of this data and start working on it for their fields. So that's what I will present. It's a platform that we call Watch It Grow. Initially, it has been developed specifically for Belgium, because we're a Belgian company, and also for mainly to monitor potato fields, because potatoes in Belgium, it's a big deal. For example, we are the largest exporter of potato products, for example, fries. So we are the largest exporter in the world for this commodity. So also you can see that where does the platform come from? It was not for the farmers that we developed it initially. It was for the industry behind it. So the factories that were turning potatoes into fries, were really interesting to see how was production going and so on. So they were the driving force. But as a result, the farmers got access to this platform as well, of course. So this platform is a bit what I will show you today. Of course, it has been made for the Belgian context, so I will show it also to you as such. Not all functionalities will be relevant for your case, but I will show them anyway, just to show you what the possibilities are, and also for you to make the connections with already ongoing initiatives at in your area. So if you look what should grow, I will start a bit with what's available on the platform. So it's basically like a website, and you log in and you immediately go to your area. It shows you with satellites the different fields and what's happening. So it shows you initially the satellite data with, like I said before, the greenness of the fields as a prime information. But as you can see in the tab Global Maps, there's a lot of other information available. Like, I will go through it in more detail, but it's also weather data that's on there, and then depending on what's available in your area, you can also put more like soil data and so on in there. So it's basically a database with a lot of different products in there, and you get access to it, and you can start playing with it. Of course, we provide a lot of data, but it's also important that the user, you, also has the possibility to add your own data, because it's really when you combine the two different informations that you get the most value out of it. And for example, what happens in Belgium typically is that farmers add, for example, soil scans. So they have maps of their soils to see where are the sandy parts, where are more the clay parts. They can add it to the platform as well. If you fly with drones in your area already, so it can be added as well, and you can keep it as kind of a database for your drone images. You can combine drone and satellites, or just pictures and reports. So you can really use it as a centralized database, if you like, where you put everything together. So you get like a one-stop shop, if you want, from your field, that you want to know, okay, this is my field. What are all the different informations that are available? Not only the remote sensing, the satellite data, but also other information sources as well. And this is basically where it would begin for you as a user, is you have your parcels, like which fields would like to monitor, and it's made for production fields where you grow certain crops, but you can add basically any type of field yourself. If you would like to monitor a certain part with natural vegetation, that's possible as well. But you just have to define that area, your parcel. And you get then an overview and showing you which are the crops or variety, but that depends on what you put in yourself. And I think one of the additional benefits is in one go, you can see all your fields. And you can see immediately the warning system that's behind it. So there are warnings that we have. Of course, for Belgium, they will be a bit different than they would be in the Southern African context, but that's also to be defined by the project. But we have like warnings defined in it, for example, drought, or if we see that your crop is growing too slow, if we see that it hasn't been raining for a long time, or if it's too warm, that it will cause heat stress. So there's a number of warnings that are available in the system, and then you can get them just in one click. You can see if there's any issue in any of the fields. And if you then click on one specific, so here you have the overview, and if you just pick one, you click on it, this is basically your information dashboard for your field. So you have a certain parcel you would like to keep track of. You click on it, this is basically what you see. At first, you just get the most current state of your field. Like this one was taken a few weeks ago. So this, of course, in Belgium, it's still winter, so it was a bare field and nothing has happened yet. So just a bare field. And of course, and then you get a lot of different informations, like how big is it? Is there an issue with soil erosion? Any warnings yet? But of course, it's the beginning of the season, so there's not much going on at this stage. So if you look at basically just start with what it was built for, the satellite data. Here you see the latest one, but actually what's available behind it, if you go there, it shows you can get an image, every available image over your field during the growing season. And here's an example of the 2019. And you can see how your field has been changing during the growing season. So of course, in the beginning, for us, April, May, everything is just planted, and then you will have slowly your emergence, your plants start to grow. And you can see if the development is going well or not, if there's any issues in specific locations. And then you get your ripening phase, so it becomes less green, becomes yellow again, and to, in the end, have your harvest in August. So that's a typical growing season, and this is actually a well-performing field with not a lot of issues. It gives you a few informations. On the one hand, it tells you the details on your heterogeneity. Like, are there any parts of my field that have problems, that are developing either much quicker or much slower than the rest? Or is there a die-off that's too soon? Is it ripening too soon? So what's happening? And that helps you in different ways. On the one hand, if you really would like to go to precision farming, but that's already a few steps too far, even in the Belgian context, it doesn't really happen yet. You can go there with variable fertilization and irrigation, but it helps you to get an overview of what's happening in your field. Do you need to go to your field to check if something is wrong, yes or no, just to get to know the fields itself. And also, because we have this, of course, for the current year, but we also have the same information from the past 5 years. So it helps you to look, okay, I see an issue now. Was it also there that the same issue the previous 4 or 5 years, or is it something new? Because if it's new, for example, it can be a disease. If you see it comes back every year in the same place, well, then you know that's maybe because it's an area that dries up more quickly than the rest, so it's more drought sensitive. So it helps you a bit understanding on what's happening there. A second thing that you can do is comparing fields. So you have multiple fields. You know which fields are developing well, which ones are developing slowly, if there's any issues. So if you have to, because sometimes we have people where the fields are very far spread out, and visiting a field actually takes a lot of time. So they use this tool as well to see, okay, I only have 2 days, I can visit 5 fields. So which 5 fields do I need to visit? And then they use it to plan their field visits. And also for harvest planning to see how is the ripening phase, when do I need to harvest, they can use it for that as well. Next slide. So that was one, that's just looking at the satellite images, what's happening, how is it evolving, that's one component. The second one, if you look now at the image, it's a bit different. And this is actually what we call a yield potential map. And I will go a little bit more into detail now. So this is not the current state, it's not the latest satellite image available, but it's actually a compilation of all the information we have since the beginning. Yeah, so the yield potential map. And what it shows you, it looks at what happened the past years. And for example, here you have the 4 past seasons where we have information available. Also, we know which crops were growing. So it's not translated, but it's, if I translate, so this is potato, this is beet, this is maize, and then 2016 it was wheat. Yeah, let's say it's wheat. And it shows you how which parts of the field during that season were performing well and which ones were performing poorly. So the red colors is where you have a poor performance, the green ones is where you have a high performance, and you can actually see how it's changing between the years, also taking into account if it was a wet season or not, or a dry season. And then you can see also with if certain crops are not necessarily well suited for that specific field. So it gives you a bit the history of that field. And here you see it's actually quite variable. We have fields where we really see that over the years it's always the same area that pops up. Here it's a bit variable and it's hard to draw any conclusions, but we also have fields where it's really visible that it's always the same part that's causing problems. So that was for the potential. So it also helps you looking at the history. Like I said before, we can also add additional layers. It's not just the satellite data. If you have drone images, if you have soil scans, like for example here, it's a soil scan that was taken of the field, you can actually put it on top of the satellite data and see if you can explain based on that the issues you have in your field. Is the reason that I'm having a poor performance, is it due to the soil? Is the underlying cause the soil, or is there, for example, a disease? If you would like to make a difference, you need to have the soil information available. So this is where it helps with the interpretation. Or drone images as well. If you look at the gray image, it's actually a drone image that we put on top of it. So you can combine the different data sources to really understand what's happening on your field. And then I think maybe for you is the most interesting. So this is a general dashboard. This was the satellites. But if you really look at the statistics, I think this is where the fun starts and when you can really start working with the data. Everything we did so far, it was mainly looking at your field, visual interpretation. It's been playing with it. It's already very helpful, but there's only it also requires you to put some time into it. But with the statistics, you can actually get the data to work for you. If you click on the statistics for your field, you get, for example, here it's your what we call the growth curve. So we talked before about the greenness. You see how it's changing over time. So of course, April, May, it's the beginning of the season, and then you see a clear rise in June. So that's where you have your emergence and your full development of your crops. And then when it goes down, it's at your ripening phase. So this is what happens on your parcel, crop development. So this is only about your crops. But you can add, we also have other information available. For example, if I go back here, you see that you have quite a lot of observations. So every green square you have is a observation. It means it's quite frequent, so we are able to follow it up a lot. But one of our worst enemies when working with satellites, it's clouds. Because when you have a cloud, and you can see it here at the bottom, when you have a cloud, there's nothing you can see. And especially in Belgium, we are a very cloudy area. It rains a lot, especially in spring. And spring is just the period where you go from emergence to full development. So for a lot of seasons and a lot of fields, we actually had it that we look at a bare field. We know, for example, potato is planted, but we couldn't see any potato yet. Then there's a very cloudy period, and the next time the satellite can actually see something because the sun is finally shining, the field is already completely covered and the crops are fully developed. So we miss entirely the most interesting period to see if there's any issues and if the farmer can still do something about it. We missed it because of the clouds. And so that's why that's a little bit on the background, we actually came up with a way to combine it with a different satellite, Sentinel-1. It's a radar satellite. And the good thing about this satellite is that it can see through clouds. It's a bit the same technology as they use to see if a car is speeding or not. It's the same technology, but then they put it on top of a satellite. And it can see through clouds without any problems. And so by combining these two satellites, we can actually enable a continuous monitoring of your crops, and we can actually see, regardless of the clouds, we can see if it's developing well or not. So if we have that, so we have the full development of the crops, we can see if it's growing well or not. I think the second thing is that's very important is then your weather data. So for every field, if you click on the statistics, you can actually see the evolution of the weather as well. So for example, on the temperature, which are these curves, you can see what it should be. So what's the long-term average? So it's a solid line. And then you have with your maximum and minimum air temperature, you can see the evolutions through time. So here's actually quite a normal development, which is okay with a few heat spikes. But that's already giving you information on the temperature and also on precipitation. So you see for every field the precipitation as well. So you see the individual rain events, and then you see the accumulation during the growing season as well of the total precipitation. Okay. I think there was a dog barking in the background. So you have the vegetation information and you have your weather information. And this is actually, I'm not going to put too much detail here right now, but this is actually where you can, I think for this specific application, where we can do some fine tuning as well, because we have for our applications in Belgium, we have some weather variables that we use, but if we can, based on those, we can also calculate very specific drought indices, like to see what the buildup is of drought. So if you look at your crop development versus available water and your precipitation patterns, to see if there's any issue or not. So you can put, or you can make warning system based on that as well. Important to know is also Watch It Grow initially is like on a website. It's something to do on your computer. But of course, if you go to the field, it would be nice to have access to the data as well. So there's also a mobile version that you can, if you have a smartphone or a tablet, you can use it as well. It has a few, it has less functionalities because it's on a smaller screen, and so it's not always to work on. But you can always get access to all the data. So your crop development, your weather information, you can all access this when you're in the field, and you can also add additional data when you're in the field. So that's also really helpful. So it's a nice additionality as well. So there was a lot of talking of what we can and cannot do, but I know, of course, it's still quite abstract. So I want to give you a concrete example of how it has been used by people not in Belgium as well, because I think it's been made for Belgium. It would then nice to see how it's been used in another area as well. So there has been a lot of interest from insurances as well, because basically all the information is there to make an insurance product from it. So there was a test with Pula Insurances in Kenya, and they want to see if they can basically use the Watch It Grow functionalities to make an insurance product. And so there was a very extensive campaign where they went into the field and actually determined the yield and yield losses. So they did actual crop cuttings where they just at specific times, so not only at harvest, but also during the season, they went to specific plots and just cut everything off to measure it, and so they can relate it to what we were providing as information as well at many different locations. And additional to that, they also had a lot of fields that they just wanted to monitor to see if the insurance product would be viable, yes or no. And so that's where they worked, for example, with Watch It Grow. They added their fields, they drew the parcels that they would like to follow, they added the crop types and so on, and then in return for those parcels, they received the information on the crop development. So basically the greenest figure we showed you before, together with all the weather variables as well. And then they looked, okay, we have all these fields, how are they developing? Are they developing normal, yes or no? How do they compare with the regional average? And I think one of the nice things about the tool is, okay, you can do something with your own field, but if the more people use it and the more data you put in, the more functionalities become possible. And for example, here with the insurances, they had a lot of fields that they registered because they wanted to follow a lot of fields. And then you can do like benchmarking and comparing exercises. For example, if you look at the black line, is basically the average of all the fields. How are all the fields normally developing? Then in the blue bars is the precipitation. And then the greens are actually the individual fields. How are they developing? Do we see any issues or not? And you can start comparing, like which areas do we see not normal development, which areas is the development normal, yes or no. So it's more just getting to know the system. There's no quantitative analysis yet. It's just getting an overview of what's happening in all the different fields. So it's mainly a comparison exercise between the fields. And then they actually looked at the crop development, like when is my season starting? Do we see changes there? Do we see delays in some fields? Are they really starting basically too early? Did somebody plant too early before really the raining season started? Or is the development normal? So when is my start of season? Then they see when was the full development, and then you have your ripening, when is it harvested. So they not only looked at the development itself, but they also looked at the phenology, like were they starting at the right time? Did they harvest quick enough, or did they harvest too quick? They were looking at that information as well. And then they really went to yield. So we have the development, they had those field data from the crop cuttings, and then you can actually link your growth curve to yield, and you can actually get good estimates of so many tons per hectare is my production in this given field. And when you can get to yield, you can also look at impact assessments. If you see there's a drought, did it have an impact on my yield, yes or no? So that's more still like a quantitative assessment, so it's mainly a yes or no question. Is there a loss because of drought, yes or no? But you can go even further, and you can go to quantify those losses. So how many losses, how many tons did we lose? Here you can on the one hand try to do it for automatic payouts, but then you need to get really precise and you need to be really sure. So that's something you typically not get in the first few years because there's just not enough data to be that certain. But it's already very helpful just to steer your field visits, like which fields have issues, and then the insurance company can just go to those fields to check what the issue is, how much loss was there, do their loss assessments on those fields. So it's in the first phase, it was just helping them to know where to look for problems. And then once you have enough data and you can get a reliable system and you start to trust the numbers, you can go actually to automatic payouts, but that's only the next phase. Additionally, once you have a few years, you can also look at historical analysis and frequency analysis. For example, how often is there a drought? How often do we see certain problems? How often is there flooding? So you can actually look at the history and see how often something is happening and what was the impact. For insurance companies, it's very important because, of course, they have to know which premium to ask to cover for the cost and so on. So they're also really interested in the historical data as well. So that's what they did. So they didn't really use the front end of Orchard Grow that much, but they really used the back end in the sense that they looked at all the crop development, they looked at and they extracted that data itself. They looked at the weather information. We also, based on their input then, because they did those field visits, we can convert that information into actual yield. And then again, they can start playing with that yield for their daily operations. So that's how this system is being used in Kenya. So okay, I already told you quite a bit. I think a little recap on different aspects. Firstly, if you would be interested to use this system, there's a few things we would also need from you. What you need to understand is What You Grow is not a one-direction tool. It's not us providing you with information. It's really like a collaboration. The more we work together, the better the information will be, and the more you can get out of the tool. For example, there's two essential components in this tool. One, as you may have seen, everything is based on parcel-based monitoring. If we do not know where the parcels are, there's not much we can do. We can give you those general maps and you can see where you can get some information, but that's basically all we can do. So once you start adding your fields, you start drawing them, or you can import them as a shapefile or however you like. But once you have parcels defined that you would like to monitor, where you would like to get information from, that's when actually the real work can start. You can upload them or you can draw them yourself, we can do that for you. So we have automatic tools to do that, but it's always better if you do it yourselves, but then you're sure that's absolutely correct. If we do it, it's basically based on what we see. And the field of how we see it from space is not necessarily the same as the field as it is defined on the ground. Just as a very concrete example, if you have two fields next to each other and you plant them both with corn, for us that's just one large field of corn. It's not two different fields. So even they may have two different owners that do things a bit different. For us it doesn't, because we just see one large patch of corn. So that's why it's always better that you do it yourselves. So the most important and the least we need is just the delineation of your parcels. And then it's basically adding data just to get more out of it as well. For example, the crop types. If we know which crop is growing on that field, we can start comparing with other fields as well, because the comparison with other fields, it only makes sense, usually, not always, if you know which crop it is. You want to know if your maize is developing normally compared to other maize fields. Especially in Belgium, different crops start growing at different times. For example, maize is actually one that starts rather late, while wheat is one that starts very, very early. So if you compare the wheat fields with the maize fields in terms of development, you're just comparing apples and pears. So to compare it with other fields, we need to know the crop types, especially if they start at different times in the growing season. Also for yield estimates, yeah, that's crop specific. So if you would like to get yield estimates, we need to know which field is on there. Also for drought impact and so on. Yeah, the crop type is important. So it really depends a bit on what you would like to get out of it, but I would say crop type is an essential component as well. And then we go more towards the nice to haves, the ones, if you can provide that information, we can provide much better services as well. For example, yield estimates. We have tools that run in Belgium, for example, or in Kenya now, that gives yield estimates, but they are not easily translatable necessarily to your area. If we just apply them, for example, we have one for maize, it works well in Belgium. If we do the same tool for you, well, it will not give very good results because growing conditions are completely different, probably the varieties as well. So it's just something completely different. So if we get fields with yield estimates, we can give you better yield estimates as well. So that's what I say, it's a two-way direction. Also with losses, if you had drought and you know how much you lost that year, we can bring that in as well. Also, once we can give you that yield, we can also help you better to assess, for example, the drought impact. Because otherwise it's more like, yeah, we see there is an issue, there was a loss due to drought, but how big was it? We don't know. If you get this yield data, we can actually put numbers on top of that. So it really, the usability of that yield depends a bit on the information we get from you. And another one is field management. If we know, for example, the planting date, because there's a big difference between when you plant the seeds and when they actually start growing. In a normal season, there's 1 to 2 or 3 weeks, depends a bit on which crop you planted, between when you plant and when they start coming out. But to see any delays in emergence because of, for example, it stopped raining all of a sudden and it's becoming very warm, so the crops are not coming out. Well, we cannot see that if we don't know when it was planted. So also there, it's nice to know when the planting dates were. So also with irrigation as well, it helps to better estimate the impact of drought and so on. So they're not really necessary to run the tool, but they certainly help to bring you or provide you with better information. And then, yeah, general overview, because a lot was said. There's a lot you can do if you want. I think the easy wins when you would start with this is just looking at your parcels. That's the basis. It's just you get images and you see what's happening, and you can just look at it and you see if there's an issue, yes or no. That's the first win. And for some people already, that was a very big change. Yeah, depends a bit on how well you know your parcels and so on. And another one, of course, is development in time. So you can see what's the situation now, but also what was the evolution, and are there any issues, yes or no. that's a given that you can use with it. And the comparison with other fields, if we have the right information, of course. But the easy wins is mainly still with interpretation by the farmer. We just give you some data. It's up to you to look at, and it's up to you to draw your conclusions, to bring in additional data sets to make your interpretation better or not. So the easy wins, it's mainly you using it, and that you can get a better understanding of the system. But then you come to the customization. Like I said, it's been made specifically for Belgium and surrounding countries. So if you would like to use it, there is room to make specific adaptations. And for example, the weather variables. We now have some variables in there that makes a lot of sense in the Belgian context. But maybe there are some additional variables we need to bring which would be relevant for you. I'm just thinking, for example, if your reference ET, for example, it's something we don't really use, but I can imagine it could be very useful for you. So we have that data, but it's not there, that we don't provide it standard. So also, if you have certain indicators that you already use and you would like to see them there, we can easily bring them. And also the warning systems. We can look at what makes sense for your specific region and with that specific warning then in the system for your fields as well. So there's some customization that we can do to make sure that the tool is adapted to the local needs. Secondly, give it a few years. We see it also in Belgium. The first year, it's really getting to know the system and trying to understand what you see. And usually you have to look at the images, and the next time you go to the field, you say, oh, okay, I see this happening in the field. I remember from the images this is a problem or not. And there's a certain learning phase. So don't get discouraged. It seems too much right now. It's like, oof, that's too much information. I will never be able to understand it or to use it, or it's too complex, or like give it some time. And we see that if you give it time, and that there is actually an uptake also by the farmers, and they really start to use it. The ones that stay, they really stay, and they really build on top of the functionalities, if not. And then you can see for yourself which functions are useful, which ones are not, what works for me and what not. But also for us, there is a learning phase. Like I said before, our yield estimates, if you would start today, will not be good for your area. If there's a certain iteration between you providing us data and we can provide better services, and you give that a few years, then it's really where the real benefit comes for everybody. And that's also, again, what we see in Belgium. In the beginning, we really had to push the farmer, like, please give us your data, and please, it will be so useful, but they're like, nah, it's too much trouble, or I don't want you to have my data. But now they do it themselves because they see what the added value is. They see, okay, if I know, for example, just the comparison with the fields in his area that he knows, is my field among the top, or am I among the worst of the class in my area? It's always very good to know, like if you know you're among the top, you know you're doing a good job, and you can keep as it is. But if you know, okay, I think I'm doing the right thing, but still my fields are the worst in the area, maybe I have to change something in my practices. And so there's a few tools that really help the farmer, and once they see that added value, we see that they start to learn, use it quite more. So I think this was my last slide. Yeah. I hope it was a bit clear. And if you have any questions, yeah, ask them now, mail me later, anything.
All right. Thank you very much, Laurent. I think it was quite interesting. So for colleagues, you just had a bit of a view on an application that was originally developed for Belgium, and I was aware of it quite early in its development. I thought it was quite interesting, and of course I wanted to see a bit more how useful it would be for areas such as this one. And I think the example that was shown for Kenya came a long way to show what could be the use of it. Of course, you may ask yourself, how is that connect with the biosphere reserve, right? But I think, of course, we have the issue of drought in our biosphere reserves. The Be Resilient project has the focus on supporting the biosphere reserves with managing their risks, and drought is one of them. And in this case, of course, we're looking at the agricultural production and how it's affected by drought. And that, of course, affects also the way people operate in your biosphere reserve. People who have no income because of drought will likely also affect more the natural services. They may start cutting trees or other things. So I think it also, of course, the biodiversity and ecosystem services in the biosphere reserve. So I think those things are linked. I think we did here very much zoom in, and I think you're looking at field level, which may not necessarily be the level where biosphere reserves are operating. Mostly they're operating more at a slightly let's say lower level, more of at a ward level, district level, municipality level. So in this sense, I think having exactly kind of type crops that we know are important in the area could be useful for extracting these more, let's say, drought indicators, but coming from a very detailed level, but giving us maybe a slightly more aggregated picture. I think for many of you, it might not be so relevant to look into individual fields, but when you, for example, pick a few areas that are typically growing certain crops, and you see that all those crops are being affected because of drought conditions, then I think it becomes quite relevant. So I would say we could identify in interested biosphere reserve these core areas where you would like to see what is going on in terms of crop development, but also natural vegetation. I mean, you didn't talk about it too much, Laurent, but I think it could also be a way to track critical vegetation that also is drought prone, or even could be affected by other reasons. It could be plagues, or it could be floods, or other, let's say, influences. So I think we could, if indeed there is an interest, and that's a question to you, colleagues, is to see indeed how you see that application be useful to you. We haven't really, let's say, tailored it to the needs of the biosphere reserve at this point, but that's exactly where we would like to have some inputs from you, how you see this could be useful, and how we should pitch a bit our work going forward as part of this Be Resilient project. So I just opened the floor, and I see a few people having their hands up. I also have already one question in the chat, so I'll just ask that, and then I'll also ask for the colleagues who have their hands up to come in, and then maybe we can give the floor to Laurent to answer some of those questions simultaneously. I'm just looking for the chat function because it seems that it moved a bit. Okay, so I think one of the questions was, how does this model deal with weed cover? Just that you have it in mind, Laurent, but I will probably just give the floor to other colleagues, the four that have their hands up. So I think the one I first is Mariko. So I'm not sure who is there from Mariko.
Mute. Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Quinn. It's both of us sitting here, but it's Michaela asking the question. So I just wanted to know, thank you for the presentation, Laurent. Both from you and Koen, I don't know if you guys know about the sensors for ICTP, that we had these discussions previously for the Be Resilient. How would the data from those sensors maybe be incorporated into this remote sensing database? And will it be possible? And if it's possible, how does that, isn't it going to be a duplication if we wanted to use both type of interventions within our biosphere reserve?
It's a good question. I just saw that a colleague from ICTP was here with us, but he had to leave for another meeting, so he's not here. But I don't think there's any overlap. Just to inform Laurent about this. So we're looking at setting up some Internet of Things sensors, Laurent, basically weather stations and maybe some other sensors, such as water level. And it, of course, provides detailed weather information from the local areas where we set up those stations. So in fact, that could be added directly into the application so that you could access it through there as well. I think that would be quite straightforward. I don't see any overlap, but maybe Laurent, you can answer that when we maybe go through the other questions as well. So I'll just maybe give, if you have anything else, let me know. If not, I would give it to Chris for his intervention. Chris Magazza.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for that very informative presentation.
Oh, Chris, you're muted now.
Right.
So, okay, now you're unmuted.
First of all, the agricultural applications that you have outlined will be very useful in the transition zone and buffer zones of our biosphere reserves where people practice agriculture, but also in the buffer zones for plantations like tea plantations, coffee plantations, and so forth. So there is potential application in a variety of crops for that. Then my other issue is in our biosphere reserves, we have the problem of fire and fire monitoring and accumulating a database of the history of fire, and then what it does to the vegetation and therefore the ecosystem would have a much better tool for managing our biosphere reserve. Soil moisture, of course, our biosphere reserves have got vegetation, some of which might be adapted to drier conditions than others. But I want to change the subject here. We have, at least one of our students has recently completed a project on measuring the siltation rate of Lake Chivero. Now, Lake Chivero is not the biosphere reserve, but Kariba, which is in the biosphere reserve. We used a very simple tool to measure silt depth, sediment depth. Fish finder is an echo sounder, which we used the double reflection from the different layers of sediment in the water. My question is this: can this be done more efficiently and quickly by satellite images?
Good question, and I think I can, Chris, answer the last question you have raised, and I think on fire I will give it to Laurent if you have any measures, and I see also some colleagues writing in the chat or other tools as well for that. But I think for water quality, we also were looking with Vito. They also have several new developments on that, which they've been rolling out as part of their commitment to the EU as well in terms of monitoring lakes. And maybe even rivers in terms of water quality monitoring from space. So there's maybe some work. I don't think it's going to be covered here, but it could be something we could raise in a later event looking at that specific item. But okay, I think that would be from my end. Maybe I just give 2 more speakers and then we can go for answering those questions. So I see Fleming, Gavin, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hi, Gavin Fleming here. I wanted to know about how to create an account. Can anyone create an account, and is it free? And if you do create an account and load your parcels, do other users get to see your field and your results? Or should I put it this way? If I'm talking about the Waterberg Biosphere Reserve in particular, if commercial and subsistence farmers were supported to load their parcels in this system and do their monitoring, would there be a way for the biosphere itself to see an aggregated view of multiple accounts? And then a second question is there an API to bring products from the system into other applications?
Thanks for those questions, and these are very relevant indeed. So I think that's a good one to discuss a bit further. I think it hasn't been used, of course, for a biosphere reserve so far, so we need to adjust that to make sure it fits the scope. And then I think we have Luke, and before we give it back to Laurent for answering those first 4, Luke, if you want to come in.
Hi, yeah, I'm Luke Metterkamp, representing the Cape Winelands Biosphere Reserve, and thanks a lot for this presentation. It's really interesting. I think there were 2 points for me which came up. I mean, our context is less about, I think, trying to understand yields and kind of field performance. And I think for us, the 2 things that would be potentially very valuable are mapping the spread of invasive species within catchment areas. So I'd value your kind of thoughts on the kind of viability of that and possible technologies for tracking that, being able to differentiate between fynbos and say, wattles or hakea, different vegetation types within a catchment, and just tracking that. And then the second, I think, big issue which we're facing here, kind of more in a commercial agricultural context, is kind of questions of compliance with water licenses and increasing competition for water resources. So issues both of water rights being over allocated within a catchment, so farmers legally being entitled to effectively over extract below kind of beyond baseline flow rates, seeing drying up wetlands and those kind of issues, but also then finding ways of detecting non-compliance when farmers are over irrigating beyond their licenses. And I think those are going to be 2 really, we're already seeing there's a big issue, but kind of a growing issue across many of the biosphere reserves in Southern Africa as the kind of water scarcity increases. And I'd value your thoughts on the kind of potential use of this to track some of those water use and flow rate issues. So yeah.
Thanks for that. Can we do one more question from Richard, and then I will give it back to Laurent. Maybe just answer you, Luke. We're aware, of course, that the interest of looking specifically at invasive species. I think the current application is not necessarily tailored to that, but there has been some work done on that. So Laurent will probably also elaborate on it. But I think that probably is going to be a different discussion. And that's also going to be a different approach, I think, than the one we're presenting here. But that's just my view on it. Richard, maybe you're the last one before we give it first back to Laurent, and then we can still open for more questions if needed. Richard?
Hi, thanks, Koen. Lauren, thanks very much. Just 2 questions. Firstly, have you been collaborating with ecologists? And if so, any highlights from that collaboration or links that you might want to share with us? Secondly, I was very interested in your mention of water quality, monitoring water quality. Could you say a bit more about that? Thanks.
Okay, so I think I give it back to you, Laurent. Maybe just on the water quality issue, and that's also kind of a different discussion we had with colleagues at Vito that highlighted they would also be interested to give a bit of an overview of what they're doing on that one, but I don't think we'll have time today. We may have to reschedule that for another opportunity, but maybe Laurent, if you want to give some inputs on that, you're good to go. So over to you, Laurent, for your answers.
Thank you. I'm trying to aggregate a bit. I think there's a few important points raised, and I think some of them I can cover relatively easily. One is the one with the field level versus municipality level. I think that the core of the monitoring system is, of course, at the field level, because you have to make it crop specific to get some certain points of information. So the core has to be field level. You need to have some fields delineated, but already in the tool, and maybe indeed I didn't highlight it enough because I really presented it from the way it's been used by the farmers. But like I mentioned in the beginning, the tool was initially developed for the potato industry. So the ones actually buying from the farmers to turn it into chips and fries. And they don't get to see the individual field level, they get to see the aggregated level. They get to see, in Belgium then, at the provincial level, at the variety specific level, but that's maybe less important. They see, is production on target, are there any issues, what's the estimated yield? So they see what the issues are also in terms of planning for their production field. So they don't see the field information, they see aggregated at a certain level that you can define, that we can define ourselves. So if you say, I would just like to see at the biosphere level, is there any drought, yes or no, and maybe with some key areas where you can aggregate it over, that's perfectly possible, and that's also the main idea we had in mind when developing it. And that's also why we work with those different users. We have the farmers, of course, but we have other people in the value chain as well, and they need different kinds of level information. So we aggregate it at a lot of levels. Also, in terms of privacy, of course, the farmers share data. It's their data, it stays their data. We never share data provided by a user to another user, unless you give explicit permission for it. Because I think it was also one of the questions then that somebody was interested in. I just need to have it at for my biosphere in general. Then we can just give you aggregated information over that level. So that's in terms of I think somebody asked about the accounts. So field data is not available to everybody. It's only available to the farmer. So actually the one who registered the parcel, so the one who has the account, draws it and brings in the information, he's also the one who sees that information and derived products as well. But the aggregated ones, we can set it up for other users. So that is just to do with types of account. Are you a farmer? Then you can you can draw parcels and you can bring field-specific information and you see field-specific information. Are you a different type of user? Then you can get to see aggregated information over certain areas. So it's dependent. When you make an account, you have to choose your user type, and based on your user type, you see the information at specific levels. So here we can play with that as well. Just to keep them on the accounts, it's free. The tool is completely free. So you can create an account, you can start drawing fields, and you can start getting the information. So I think for the users, as we envision them here, it's free. So that's already those questions. If you then look, for example, it's indeed tailor-made to crops, of course. But I think what would be nice for the biospheres is indeed if you can treat them as parcels, but you highlight certain areas in your biosphere that you would like to monitor and try to keep it a bit homogeneous, but you can delineate certain parts of forest or grazing land or wetland, whatever system you have in your biosphere, that you delineate them and you treat them as a parcel, and then basically you get any of the drought warnings, you can get any of the warnings for that specific part that you delineated. So that way you can basically highlight certain areas, smaller areas, homogeneous areas that you monitor in detail in order to get a general overview of your biosphere performance. So those don't necessarily have to be crops. You can also put it over other vegetation types as well. But of course, then you have to take into account that you not treat all functionalities. I mean, for example, if you would, well, you will not get yield estimates or biomass estimates and so on, of course. So you will not be able to use all functionalities, but it will help you in getting an overview of how is my biosphere reacting to certain, for example, to a drought event. It will help you in that case anyway. Weed cover in fields. To be honest, it's an issue we don't really have in Belgium because the farmers are really particular about removing weeds. So usually we just look at the field as one entity. So when I show you those crop developments and the yields and so on, we see as the field as one entity. So everything that's green contributes to our estimates. But I know indeed in other areas weeds can be a big problem, but currently we do not account it for. If you really would like to go to yield estimates, it's something we have to look at how to take into account. Many of the other functionalities will not be affected that much. Like I think, for example, all the warning systems as well, I think it might be okay, but it really for yield specific, I think the weed cover we have to look at. The sensors, the ICTP, it's not an issue at all. I also mentioned in my presentation, we are very compatible with additional data sources. So you can very easily integrate additional sensors and you can get them for your field. So if you look at the field overview that I presented, if you click on the field and there's a sensor in that field, it will come with your statistics as well. So if you measure daily temperature with that sensor, you will get the daily temperature as we get it from the weather companies, but you will also then see the weather data as you have it from your field sensor. So they're just complementary, and you can actually use the Watch It Grow platform as a way to visualize that data, that you don't have to have two different ones. Or you can have two different ones. For example, if the sensor has its own platform, sometimes that's also the case. But we can make connections that you just, if you are a user and you're working Watch It Grow, and there's usually then we have what we call the marketplace, and that's to connect to additional data providers. For example, in Belgium, the machines nowadays start measuring a lot of things as well. If you harvest, you have harvest machines or planting machines, they collect a lot of data as well, and they usually have their own data platform that is easily connected, and just with one click you can switch between Watch It Grow and the other platform. So if your sensors have their own platform, we can connect them. If they don't, you can integrate it in Watch It Grow just to include them with your statistics. We try to be as open as possible. The aim is that we're never competition, because it's not our aim to take over the market. So we try to be as open as possible to other data providers, and normally integrating it we're really open to it. I mean, we never block it, or we haven't blocked it up until now. So I don't see any issues there. For the rest, when I look at the questions, well, there was a question about fire. I think indeed, as was also mentioned in the chat, if you really look at early fire detection, we're not equipped for that right now, because usually what you have is more thermal sensors. You really look at heat, and they're not included in the system right now. So I think you have better systems already in place. But if you look at, for example, damage assessment, like a burn has played, how large is the area, how well is it recovering? I think the tool is equipped for that. I mean, you can visually already see the burnt area. You can delineate it, for example, as a separate parcel, and then you can monitor its progress to see how well is it recovering and so on. So as an early warning tool, I wouldn't use it. I think there are better tools as keeping track of how many and how are they recovering. I think you can use the tool. API is a very good one. I didn't mention it, but normally of course we have the platform. Everything on the platform is available through APIs, and even more products. We have more products available through API than we have through the platform. Just because, yeah, we can calculate as many products as you want, and if you have to keep them all as a standard product, it just becomes too much, and it's not. It also becomes overwhelming for the user, because there's just so many different data layers. So we just keep with the greenest, as we say, but there's many more that you can have. So we have a catalog of data that you can extract just through API, and then you don't have to go manually through the platform anymore, and then you can just pull them in at your own frequency that you would like to have. So API is definitely an option as well. Then we have the invasive species question. I think the tool as it is right now is not equipped for invasive species, because it's really focused at the parcel information. So you really look at the parcel as a one entity. So even if you would delineate a certain part of the natural vegetation and would like to see some changes in time, really information about infestation rate and what's the coverage of a certain species within your natural vegetation, it's not equipped for that. You can see the tool itself, but I know they're also looking at, for example, productivity differences when you have invasive species. Like they look at how is it affecting the productivity, or the resistance or the resilience of your ecosystem. Those things you can do, but really, what's the spread is not something we can do. We already discussed with Koen a bit. I think you need different technology to really look at that problem than the sentinels that are the basis of our tool. But so I think if you really are interested, it's a discussion by itself, but I would not use the tool as it is right now. Regarding the water, that's a very interesting one. Also in Belgium, it's really high on the agenda because actually Belgium is a country that's very water scarce. We don't have a lot of water per person. We have a lot of water, but we also have a lot of people. So if you calculate the amount of water available per person, it's really low. We're actually one of the lowest in Europe. So the drought issue is really growing, it's becoming very problem. So even in Belgium, we're really looking at it. The issue there is the basis or the base product you would need is actual evapotranspiration. That's the basis of all those analysis on water consumption and who is irrigating when and how much are they irrigating and is it according to the agreements and so on. If you would like to do that from space, the base product is evapotranspiration, actual, not reference, but actual. And that operationally is only, I think the best resolution is either, let's say it's 250 meter. You have a product at 10 meter, we don't have it, but we can calculate it if needed, but it's still in a development phase, let's say. It's not that reliable to really do advanced calculations on it and really make decisions on for example, penalizing farmers because they irrigated too much. I would say the accuracy is not high enough to really start using it as that. So there is a 250 meter product available. Not through what you grow, but you have over Africa, you have the FAO has a data portal for that. It's called the Water Productivity Portal. And they provide the data on there specifically for that issue. So they made a portal over Africa specifically for this, to see which water productivity, water consumption for agriculture, where are the issues, who is over consuming. So I would suggest if for that question, you really look at that portal. I think they have the best data available currently over Africa. It's only Africa and the Near East. But I think in terms of validation and quality, it's the best there is. By accident, we're also providing data for that one, but not the ETA data. We're more the vegetation side. There's not a partner doing the ETA calculations. So I would not say what you grow, but look at the FAO portal for that question. And I think then we're almost at the end. Ecologist. I think that's a really interesting question. What you grow by itself has not been used by ecologists. They're not really looking at it either, but they are looking a lot at remote sensing data in general. But the functionalities in what you grow are not tailored to that audience, so they're not really looking at it. So I would say right now, and it's a bit the same discussion that, how can we monitor? Okay, it's good to monitor the fields in our biospheres, but how do we measure the natural vegetation? How can we see drought impact there? Like I said, then you have to delineate certain areas you want to monitor. So basically, the Watch You Grow will help you do just that. What's the impact of drought? Are there any issues? How well is it growing? But not more than that. It will not look at biodiversity. It will not immediately say you something about resistance to drought. It will not say you anything about recovery rate immediately. You can get it out of it if you use the data, but it's not as an information product in there. If you really look at the trajectories and how is my vegetation evolving, and you really start working with the data, you can get it out. And it's something we can look at, but it's not there. Like, for example, we have a drought warning system. So is there an issue, yes or no? But we never look at the recovery side. There's nothing there, because for a crop it stops at that year, but natural vegetation, it keeps evolving. You have impact over multiple years. That's something we haven't done or haven't looked at yet. So I would say that's really what you would like to do. The base data is there, but you will have to start working with it yourself to get the information out. And then in terms of water quality, I think Koen already mentioned, we have a few products like sediments, sediment concentration, like chlorophyll concentration to follow up on excessive blooms and blooming events and so on. So we have a few of those products that we can do. They're not on Watch You Grow at this moment. If there's a request for that, it's something, but I think it's a separate discussion. But there are some products that we have. We just have to make sure it's what you need, because water quality is very broad. It can encompass many different things. So it depends a bit on what the specific needs are and what the scope of the project also is. Does it fit here? Doesn't it fit here? That's to be discussed later on. I think those were all the questions. If I missed something, you can say so.
Thank you very much. I think that that actually ticked the boxes, for at least from my side. I think most questions were answered. Maybe one more round, so people who want to come in to reflect on that or give some more responses. So as I said, for the water quality one, we will have another discussion. We just started a discussion with Vito, indeed, what they are producing. It would be interesting to maybe share that with you and get some feedback either through a similar meeting or just by email. Alternatively, the issue on invasive species, I think, also warrants a different discussion. It's more a hyperspectral approach, and that is not what's currently being used in what it grows. So it's not really the same type of product, but it could be a target for our other project, which is targeting South Africa particularly. So I'm not seeing any more hands up from your side. Any more questions? I just want to make one more announcement, but just before we go there, right, so I think there's a question about, can we get historic imagery as well for a specific parcel? I think we do, right? But probably, can it be done already, let's say today, looking backwards? It only can be done when it's delineated.
No. When we set it up then for the area, it will start in I think halfway 2015. It's when the art from that satellite starts. So normally it's included up to 2015.
All right, so we can
long
have
term,
that.
Yeah, you can have that, but not long term, because long term, like if you talk about 20 years, no, because the resolution is just only available since 2015.
Okay, but I think that is already a nice period, 6 years of data for that high level. I think that's already quite unique. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
More questions in the chat or live? Just go once around. Any more questions here? I don't see any more questions. I might just make a link with what we're also doing on other elements. So, you know, we've been looking at risks from different sides. I may just share my screen for a minute. Just for people to see this as well. So you may ask yourself, how does that fit into the let's say the largest scope of work that the Be Resilient project is trying to do, which is basically looking at several risks. And of course, we have floods, we have droughts, and drought is a very complex phenomenon. Of course, it has a very slow rise, but it can affect, of course, lots of areas. It can affect agriculture, but it can also affect other areas such as biodiversity. So I think this is one particular effort to deal with the agricultural component. When we look at it from a bit more of a global effort, we're also developing these more national tools in which biosphere reserves also will be able to access and maybe become drivers of its further implementation, which is, for example, this kind of a more let's say traditional approach where you integrate different data sets. Here we're looking at soil moisture information, different indicators for drought, but also looking at flood. So for example, here this is an example over Zimbabwe, which was just released. We also have one for Mozambique. We're developing one for Namibia, South Africa, and Malawi, and we probably follow up with other countries as well, where basically you can have very detailed information over for different indicators that are relevant, but also looking at which areas are extremely wet at this moment, which districts are affected. But also it provides you, for example, short-term forecasts for the next 7 days, and it's a bit outdated for the moment, but it will be up to date quite soon, where you basically get an understanding of the uncertainty on that forecast. You can have that also by district, and you can look, for example, what are the extreme conditions happening, and this is, for example, where you have quite dry conditions, where you have quite wet conditions currently happening, but also where the forecast is going to be looking at. So, for example, where is the rain forecast for the next 7 days, showing extreme wet conditions compared to normal. You can also look at river points here, so that's more in detail. different areas of the country and looking at forecast of potential flooding. Seasonal forecast, you get actually the next few months in terms of what are your likely conditions going to be in terms of rainfall or for some other indicators that we're developing. So that again can be done for national level or for sub level. So this is a national product. Other things which are also interesting is, for example, this one. I'm just going to tick a few boxes here. It looks at where are the likelihood for weather than normal conditions in the country. I'm just going to try to zoom out a bit so you can see. So you can quickly see, for example, the probability of weather conditions in the next 2 to 3 months. And you can see, for example, for the Chimanimani area, there may be some weather spells expected in between now and 3 months. So that can help us to steer some other issues such as potential impact of floods, maybe some drought indicators that start evolving. But then we have the opportunity to zoom in with the tool we saw today and say, okay, what's happening at the field level, and really start looking more at the impact at the level we're interested in. So that's just a very short introduction. I would like to give a bit more of an elaborate one when we have more of these systems operational, so that we can start identifying how we can tailor it better to the needs of the Biosphere Reserve as well. That's just kind of an add-on comment. I didn't want to take the time to go in much detail here, but just to give you a bit of an understanding how it links to other work we're doing as well. So I think what we would need from you is kind of a feedback, and I think we got it already a little bit, but we probably provide you with an online form for you to fill out with some simple questions like, would you be interested to use this tool? The way we're thinking of setting it up is to ask Vito to set up a system for the Biosphere Reserve so that we actually can look at them, all of them at the same time. In a way that we will not have information for all countries, but we'll have it for the areas of interest, so that we can tailor it, test it, see how it works, because also the cost is really into the data provision. So the Biosphere Reserves, of course, take out a big lap of territory, but they're not taking out the full region, which of course makes it manageable. Once we go into covering the whole of Southern Africa, we're looking at huge data sets. But for the areas of the Biosphere Reserve, we should be able to really provide that data if there is interest from your side. So we just keep on having the conversation with Vito. We would need your inputs to see exactly how we would steer that product and make sure it's useful for action on the ground. So you can expect from us a follow-up email where we detail some questions, and also where you have some space for giving your feedback and ideas that may actually be part of this discussion with Vito. I hope that helps us forward. I hope it was useful to you. If you have any further questions, you can always reach us. If somebody wants to make final comments, you're still, let's say, open to do that. We're still have like 3 minutes left. So you don't see any hands up at the moment. So I hope it was interesting for you as much as this was for us. I would like to thank also Laurent and the team to prepare the presentation, and also to be available for supporting the region to have this kind of newer technology available. And I hope we can work together as a team to make sure we make some some very impactful results with this detailed work. So thank you all, and we will be inviting you for further discussions on other topics in the near future. Thank you very much.
Okay, and thanks for the invitation. Bye.
Sure, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks, Laurent.
Right. See you all.